This is a story about the stories we tell ourselves, the stories we live out in the world, and the space between those two. It's about how we love, how we lose, and how we recover, or not, through the stories we make up in our heads. I'm Robin Rice, and this is also my story. Preface to Chapter 8. It is by now well known that those who hear stories of suicide may copy the act. And so this chapter must include a warning. If you are in any way concerned about yourself, please skip this chapter. You'll also find resources on suicide in our show notes. Chapter 8. When They Are Cut. There are any number of ways to tell a love story. Yet no matter how you approach it, it will be difficult. Who can capture that undeniable feeling of connection between two souls? That union so potent we universally long for it, become elated when we find it, and live bereft without it. The arrival and departure of such a love is one of the few things we cannot control in life. We feel it or we don't. Much like I felt Roxanne's love over my own mother's and Nell's light over Joanne's. But where does it come from? And when a loved one leaves, where does it go? Some people believe in love at first sight. Some experience it as a profound recognition. Some say of their beloved that he or she is my person, that singular individual they cannot imagine living without. Yet others will credit the love bond as a mere procreational urge of biology, a kind of pheromone-inducing lock and key. Even so, they will not deny the irresistible draw, at least if they have felt it within themselves. Some believe in soulmates and connections over multiple lifetimes. Of those in this camp, many claim only romantic connections qualify. As for me, I'm willing to include fathers and mothers, sisters and brothers, cousins, friends, and even someone we might meet for only one moment and never see again. Whatever the theory, such things are felt, not explained. The exact affinity is private, understood by only the two. I wrote about it on my first wedding invitation, calling it a secret inclination, though I now expect I was more hopeful of it than feeling I had actually found it. To talk about a grand love with genuine feeling makes us sound irrational, because in fact we are not rational. We only know what we know, that there is something here that was not here before. Something more and more true with two than there was with only one. Something magical. Something meaningful, something profound, some door that is opened, a door that was not there before. The heart has reasons that reason cannot know, said Pascal. I think that's right. But how do we confirm it? That this is our soulmate, our singular true love, or at least one among a higher order of souls to call ours? How can we prove that we are in a love story, and not only a like story or an infatuation story? Worse, a mere fantasy. I would say we can't. Such love stories cannot be confirmed or proven. We can only know them for ourselves, within ourselves. We may hope the other of our pairing feels as we do, but that is never guaranteed, nor guaranteed to last. And the pain, deep, deep pain, when we live in love alone. Others may see the telltale rose-colored glasses on us, sometimes before we do, but they cannot say if it is something true we feel. Even with all this uncertainty, I do have a kind of test, crude as it is, which has proven worthy. To know that you know that you know whom you love. It goes like this. When they are cut, you bleed. So these are the kind of stories I want to consider today. The soulmate kind, the larger-than-life kind, but also the cutting, bleeding kind, the too big to reduce to metaphors, the too terrible to turn into palatable idioms, the too much to take on, the far too much to feel. If you have been with me from the start of this journey, you understand I'm the sort to dive straight into the tough stuff. But what about the too tough? How do we work our way into that desolate story territory? First, I can tell you from experience, we sit and do nothing. The first days and weeks of dedicated writing are the worst, as any decent storyteller knows. Like sitting with Shiva, the god of destruction, inside ourselves, inviting him into our story. Come, Shiva, have tea. See what you have done. See what you are doing still. For this chapter, as example, on the first Monday of planned diving in, I instead bought $100 worth of groceries for myself, and by Tuesday had eaten more than half. 3 weeks later, I was still buying and eating too much food, mostly while binge-watching any TV show that was both engaging enough to hold some piece of my attention and boring enough to let me think in the back of my mind about how to write the unwritable. With no other vices, savory potatoes, Irish cheddar cheese, and blackened salmon consumed en masse, while watching the ultra-rich find property in Canada, had to suffice. One day, just this week, a month in, and the day I swore I would in fact absolutely put my fingers to the keyboard, I instead drove an hour to my eldest son's house despite active tornado warnings. Turns out, a landing ripped up 10 stores in a lane of highway only a half mile from my house, so maybe it was a good move anyway. While I was supposed to be writing, I painted my son's living room, his bedroom, and his hallway. As I worked, I listened to some recorded Rumi poetry, the good stuff translated by Robbi Behr, and spent intermittent moments of intentionality meditating on the void of all existence. Anything but what I really needed to think about. How to enter a story I would have done anything to have never had happen in the first place. The only thing that came to me after that long day, that long month, was that this was never, ever going to be easy, no matter how I entered the story. So, sometimes, the story about the story has to be this. Get on with it. Though it kills you, if you are going to, you are going to. If you must, you must. Face the beast and say what needs to be said. Tell what needs to be told. Do it now. Enter the labyrinth. So, we have arrived at the story of Ricky, my little brother, my first true love. We met when I was 4 years old and he 4 days old. I've already told you about his death, so you know how this story goes. I've spoiled the ending because, to be honest, I just couldn't take another surprise like that. Not even for you. Ricky. The one who was once Richard David Rice. First, let me tell you about his face. As I write, I have scattered out pictures of him, many I have not seen in years. Every age is here, from the newborn baby laid carefully in my lap to the pudgy toddler laughing in the bathtub, to the 9-year-old in front of a birthday cake, unimpressed to be having his picture taken, to the 8th grade football player lined up with the team. He only played 1 year, being more of an artist than an athlete. To the tall, lean, muscular 18-year-old. This was when it was all about to end. He was olive-skinned, unlike me, who was all Irish white with a hint of pink. His lips were full and red and shaped differently than mine, and his nose slim and far more elegant. He had the dent in the chin from my mother's side of the family, as if someone hammered a chisel deep into it, leaving an 1/8-inch horizontal line, which I'm glad to say my face was spared. He had dimples like mine, but higher cheekbones, which made him look altogether different from myself and our other brother. Our teeth were the same, both having a nice set but for one left tooth that came in a tiny bit further back than the rest. Our thick hair was exactly the same warm brown, and his shines before me, the same as mine once did. We share the same eyes in color but not shape. It was here, eyeball to eyeball, where you could begin to understand who we were to each other, where you see the artist, the dreamer, the writer in us both. At least I did. I do. I start this tragedy with his face because that's the worst of what we lost, what was gone in a split second, obliterated by his own finger on the trigger of a rifle. Not a handgun, a rifle. It must have been cocked and set at arm's length, we figured. Either that or he leaned down into it. I've thought about that detail a little too much over the years. How he accomplished it. How his face was lost. First and completely. It's gruesome, I know, but some stories are. It's important to tell them anyway, especially here now for me, because for a very long time, Ricky's death was the story that broke me. It further broke me and the God I had by then claimed not to believe in. It broke me and the whole idea of love, especially love within a family. It broke me in any sense of hope or ever having real hope again, because no matter what happened in my life, Ricky wasn't coming back, so life was never going to be fully okay. It broke me in everything else I would say or do or write or give or make. I'd say it broke my heart, but then you'd think you know what I'm talking about, and you don't. No one will ever know. Ricky and I were Ricky and I. No one else was included in that union. We were the only two who will ever know what we lost, what he left me to live with, alone. Which leads me back to true loves, and how when they are cut, you bleed. The first time I remember Ricky being cut on my watch was when the boyfriend of my mom's friend, Brenda, was hanging out at our house. He was waiting for Brenda to get off work. It was all kinds of wrong from the start. First off, the boyfriend was a grade younger than me in high school, which we were still in, and Brenda was my mom's age. Oof, still makes me shudder. If that was not ugly enough, he himself was truly unattractive, a full of himself yet utterly gross idiot. Probably why he could only get a twice-his-age girlfriend, I remember thinking. Second, Ricky and I would have to listen to them having sex in the room above our living room after school and before my mom came home. It was our house, but did Mom care? Brenda, trying to be hip and cool with go-go boots and tight sweaters, while halfway into her 40s, helped with the rent and kept Mom company. If it worked for Mom, it had to work for us, right? So one day in the living room, the underage high school boyfriend, I forget his name, Barry, Barney, Kevin, Keith, we'll just call him stupid boyfriend, was playing with a huge rubber band. Thick, strong, and able to travel fast, he let it fly with random intent. It hit Ricky in the face, just a hair shy of his left eye. Hard. My brother cried out in both shock and pain as I instantly rose to my feet. You don't want to know the Robin that was unleashed in that moment. I was nothing short of a force. I felt rage unleash itself within me as stupid boyfriend was cornered, pinned to the wall, screamed at in the face, and shoved out the door. I could have lifted a car, and that power was 100% directed at fucking stupid boyfriend's stupidity. I can still see his shocked face and hear his whining apologies. Not a chance, idiot. I had no compassion, only fury and absolute resolution. If it killed me, I would be sure he never set foot in our house again. He didn't. It started and was over with fucking stupid boyfriend in less than a minute. I quickly went to cradle Ricky, making sure he wasn't truly damaged. He let me comfort him, and we sat in what felt to be a rising pool of awareness that life just sucked. That our life in particular sucked. The feeling rose in and between us as the great welt rose on his face. We shared a sense of the wrongness that lived in us both, and an understanding that we had seen too much of its shittiness already. I poured my love into him. He felt it. He rested in it. We both did. Sitting with him, rocking him in my arms, was that the moment when I truly learned to love, or at least knew what it was meant to be like? It seemed I was again facing such a familiar feeling, that of senseless pain and damage hollowed out by the randomness of life. The accidents that seemed to not be random, given how they happened to us in particular all too often. And then on the other side, the love between us that was strong enough to rise and attend to our needs, bringing what was beautiful even in the suffering. I don't know if he knew it, but I knew I was bleeding out for more than just that moment's rubber band. I was bleeding out for Ricky, poor little Ricky, born in the same family I had been. It was an existential moment, I see now, though I'm sure it never registered as such as it was happening. That night, I remember making an angry promise to any and all living beings. I don't care who you are, what your motive is, or where you hide. You hurt my little brother and you will pay. I swear you will. The next time Ricky was cut, though, it was worse, because it was at the hands of our own grandfather. By this time, we are well into the story of my parents' divorce and how we kids were left alone too much. Now we have to consider my two living grandparents, both on my mother's side. Dorothy, my grandmother, was something like a saint, though I did overhear that one time when she had a conversation with my aunts about how much I could eat, which was devastating to me. But that was her one and only transgression, which for an entire human life isn't bad. Grandma was the one I sat next to in her little country church. I loved to hear her confidently sing the old faithful songs like Amazing Grace and In the Garden. She believed in the messages they offered. It was both comforting and stabilizing to sit next to such conviction, especially coming from a shaking elderly voice. Emery, my grandfather, was another story. A successful farmer owning several properties, he raised a special breed of cattle. He took them to compete with the best, and it always seemed they won. He was respected by everyone, especially at church, or so the story was told. While I will be forever grateful for the stability he offered us through my single mother's struggling years, half a side of beef was delivered to our basement freezer whenever it was needed, and I'm sure a boatload of cash as well. I must admit, after a certain age, I didn't respect him. I couldn't. He could be mean, pointedly so, and not care that he had been. It felt as if his reputation entitled him to the meanness, which I never understood. In fact, I've never understood meanness in anyone. One story sticks with me. When teaching me to drive with a clutch, he waited for me to make a mistake and then pinched the hell out of my leg, so hard I thought a chunk of it was ripped off. It was more painful than anything I'd experienced so far in my life, by an order of many magnitudes. He justified the abuse by saying, "I'd never do that again, now will you?" More like, "Never trust you again, Grandpa, now will I? Never drive with you again, Grandpa, now will I?" Of course, no one would ever say something like that out loud, not to my grandfather, especially not to his face. But I would think it. I would think it hard. So there we were, Grandma, Grandpa, Ricky, and me. I just returned from the overnight Christian camp they sent me to for a week each summer. I was full of all the feelings that came from meeting, bonding, and leaving a new set of friends who truly liked me and accepted me. I silently twiddled the paper clip the camp counselor had given me at our parting circle, telling everyone he chose it for me as a symbol of being the one who held the group together. By now, you likely understand I did not get that kind of validation very often, and leaving it to go back to my daily reality had me feeling more than tender. I still don't know what Ricky did, but my grandfather suddenly took the blunt end of his heavy dinner knife and flicked it with a finger so hard it twanged into Ricky's knuckles. It was startlingly loud, and Ricky cried out, then quickly choked it back. As I watched, his tears rolled down my face. When my grandfather called me out for it, asking if I was soft for my brother, I lied and said no, that I was upset about leaving my camp friends. It was not that I was not willing to stand up to my grandfather, but because in a split second I realized that if I admitted it to being about Ricky, it would have made things worse for him. Even so, I felt instantly guilty, like I should have stood up and yelled, "What kind of fucking grandfather are you? What kind of man, for that matter, are you?" Later that afternoon, I told Ricky I was sorry that Grandpa was such an asshole. I could tell he appreciated it, but in his usual quiet way, he only nodded. Still, I feel I didn't do enough. I made a vow to take my revenge through an active lack of forgiveness. Never love you again now, will I, Grandpa? Never respect you again, no matter what anyone else says or how the story goes with those who don't know you. I didn't go to my grandfather's funeral because I was on my way to get a flight to Ireland when I got word that he died. But I have to say, I wasn't ripped up about it. I held my grudge because I never forgot the sound of that painful, hard twang, nor the sight of Ricky's eyes dropping and struggling to avoid tears. To this day, it reminds me how, when they are cut, you bleed. Willingly, you bleed. Voluntarily, you bleed. Wholeheartedly, you bleed. Now, the next story about Ricky being cut might confuse you, because it ought to have been something good that happened. Really good. Most people thought it was. I don't know how I knew it wasn't, but somehow I did. Ricky was 14 and spending the summer at our grandfather's farm, this time raising a steer he was given to take to the state fair. He didn't have a chance in hell of winning next to the local kids who had been around cattle their whole lives. He'd not even cared for it personally, living a state away except in the last months of the task. But that was not the point. The point was to give him something to do while my mother worked, because my older brother and I were already out of the house. I heard the good news over the phone, and then later through the newspaper pictures that were splashed across living rooms throughout Indiana. Ricky won. Not a blue ribbon, not a purple ribbon, but the whole damn fair, the biggest prize for all the cattle of every breed that year. Grand champion, complete with a trophy half the size of my little brother. The newspaper's photographer captures Ricky sheepishly smiling and my grandfather grinning as they reach out to shake hands. My grandfather as proud as you can imagine a grandfather being. For our family, this was like taking the winning shot of the Purdue basketball game as a walk-on who never played beyond the backyard. Like I said, it should have been all kinds of good. But I had a sinking feeling. Because where do you go from that? Also because he would have to live with the fact that when the 4-H kids called him Lucky Ricky, he'd known they were right. He won, but he didn't earn it. And that mattered to him. I've since wondered what it must have been like to know that no matter what you did, you'd never ever get that kind of smile from Grandpa again. And it was mostly because of luck, not talent or a job well done. I celebrated and congratulated Ricky, don't get me wrong, but I also worried about him. Maybe I knew the next cut to come. Maybe I knew it like I knew my father had cancer before he told me. I don't know why exactly, but I remember thinking Ricky would never again accomplish anything so grand as that grand championship. I was right. So now, it's time. The cut of cuts. I don't blame you if you skip this part. I wish I could. The urge to suicide isn't something you can truly understand until you know what it feels like to want to die. Just 22 to Ricky's 18 years old, I knew. To be clear, there are times when anyone will think it's bad, and that in some abstract way they might want to end it all. That's not what I'm talking about. Because there are other, deeper times when someone slides into serious consideration. Those are the times I mean. My close call lasted 3 days. I didn't tell anyone, so of course no one came. I sat in it alone. Wrote it out, whatever the outcome, alone. I remember it came in waves, like a horrific flu, just an emotional one. The dark pain would rise, consume me, then subside a bit, only to rise again darker than before. Pitch black. I was aware that I wasn't tickling the fancy of the idea of suicide. I wasn't merely tempted or trying to get some juice out of the drama. I was caught under the big wave, the one that won't let you up long enough to even think about the how. I figured I'd figure out the details the moment I had another ounce of energy to do so, and I promised myself to do that as soon as possible. I wanted the darkness to be over, and if that meant dying, and therefore finding a way to die, that was fine. The way I saw it, I'd done harder things. Fortunately, the big wave let up. The darkness found a persistent bit of light, and within that relief, I no longer felt a need to find a way to accomplish my aim. So when I got the call about Ricky's last morning, all I could think of was the hell I'd once been in, and how his hell must have been even worse. Because he did it. His darkness, his wave had not let up. And then I thought about never ever seeing him again. Having been there before, I knew what it meant. When you die forever. The thought was so unbearable, so profoundly incomprehensible, I left my body. I watched myself stumble from the stairs leading from the basement to the first floor of my house, even though I had no idea what I was doing or where I might go. I lifted further up and away and saw myself as Robin holding on to the blonde wood banister and heard her scream, "No." I watched her knees buckle and her knuckles go white under the strain of holding herself up. I remember the carpet was cream-colored, the walls too. But all I could see was red, the color of blowing your head off with a gun at close range. Red on the walls, red on the carpet, red on the bed, red droplets on the dresser. I heard some greater self, the one looking at my physical form, say he had every right. So matter of fact, I could not argue, or would not. I wasn't sure who was speaking, but I heard the voice as clear as if there were someone standing next to me, talking directly into my ear. On my right side, to be specific. I knew it was true. He did have the right, every right. But for me, it was so very, very wrong. Everything about it was wrong. And now it always would be. There was no going back. A permanent, indelible, undeniable wrong had been done in this world, one that would not be undone ever. That's death for you. Not a sliver of hope left. On the plane returning to Michigan that day, I was barely able to keep my heaving sobs from overtaking me. Yet there was a clarity, too. In that clarity, I thought about the deal I'd made with God. I was sure upon sure, that God had done this to bring me back into relationship with his holy godness, to punish me, to prove he was God in the worst of ways. He called my deal in an unfathomably brutal way. The Old Testament God, to be sure. Back when I made the deal, I knew that I would know when it was God, proving his authority, trying to get me back, but no fucking deal. I bargained my life, not my brother's. I silently screamed into my grief. And that was all there was to say between me and God. No more discussion. I vowed to never ever trust the divine again, even if he was in charge. You maybe thought my grudge against my grandfather was a bit much. It was nothing compared to this. I promised that, even in moments when I would profess to believe, I would be lying. I would be lying to the grandest of fathers, the father of all fathers, and fucking not care. In that moment, a wedge of an ultimate anger between myself and God was hammered into my heart and, a few days later, buried alongside my brother. I was clear. Motherfucking fucked up God, you win, but you do not win me. Not ever. Not 1 ounce, not a feather's weight of this body or mine will be yours. You exist, I feel it, but I will exist apart from you. Deal, done, deal. Ricky was buried closed casket, like Roxanne. I remember wishing I could have seen his feet, at least his feet, to be sure he was gone. For years, I would dream about him not having died, finding out he'd just run away and meeting him so much later and thinking, how could you do that to me? I would have welcomed even that, as would any of us with such a loss. But it was not to be so. After Ricky's death, I had a conversation with Paul, who had spoken to him the night before. Paul knew he had a gun. Paul said Ricky thought that due to everything with my dad, he might be gay too, even though he was pretty sure he wasn't. It weighed on him, along with what I can only assume was every other thing from our lives. Still not aware of how terrible it had been for Ricky, we laid him in the grave next to my father. I'm not sure any of us thought it through or could have. We had the plot, and everyone believed they were close. I guess no one considered that he might not have wanted to be buried next to the man who made him doubt his sexuality, obliterate his individuality, and confiscate his truth when he was too young to know to object. If I had known then what I know now, he would never be buried there. But he is. For 5 years, I could not speak Ricky's name. When I tried, my throat swelled tight. My heart beat hard and fast, and the 5 letters simply would not form into a word and come out. The only comfort after his death, at least for many years, was a dream I had a few months after his passing. As if summoned, I was taken to a large, dark warehouse. It was black to the point of seeming surreal. A broad spotlight was beaming on Ricky, who was sitting on a folding chair and tilting dangerously back. The chair was placed over a white line that ran through the exact center of the chair's 4 legs. 2 legs behind, 2 legs in front. Leaning back as if tempting fate, the 2 front legs not touching the ground, he was at the very edge of falling backward. I instinctively knew I was there to help. I started yelling at him, "Ricky, stay here, don't go to the other side." Ricky tipped further and further back. I was not sure what he would decide. Even so, it was clear that it was his decision. Again and again, I pleaded with him with anything I could think of. "I love you. Ellen loves you." I repeated it again and again. I had no idea why I was speaking of our cousin Ellen, or why love was the key to this plea. For as long as I was allowed, I begged him to put the legs down, to get off that chair. It seemed he heard me, yet he continued to lean back. I had no idea what I was doing, only that I had been called to do it and I would give every effort I had in me. It wasn't unlike when I cradled him after being hit by fucking stupid boyfriend's rubber band, except I was screaming out my love this time. I remember it echoed in that cold, barren, otherwise empty warehouse. Suddenly, not ready, I was ripped back to my waking life. It was over. I had no way to know if I had been successful in my mission. All I could know was that I had been given the chance to try, and that was something. It was little comfort, but some. And some days, was what kept me going. Later, and to this day, I would say that encounter was more than a dream, more like a visitation, something real in another world. I think about that dream as I think about our last phone call a few days before he died. I would later learn he already had the gun. But at the time, for me, it was just another call. I chit-chatted on, telling him about the business I was starting and all my great plans of life. I asked him to get Mom some flowers for Valentine's Day because it was likely going to be lonely for her, not having anyone else to buy them. I noticed how he laughed in such an odd way. I wondered if they'd fought. I almost asked. I wish I had. Instead, I said I had to go and, as ever, ended with, "I love you." He said, "I love you too." He said this to me with a gun nearby and a plan in mind. He, the one I loved like beauty itself, was about to leave, give himself relief, and change my life forever. I'm sure he wasn't thinking of that. I'm sure he thought I and everyone would be better off without him. They say that's a common thought for many who contemplate suicide. It's never true. It's a trick of the mind hell-bent on relief. But he was already in the undertow. Valentine's Day was Ricky's last full day alive. It's now more than 40 years that he's been gone, and proof, at least for me, of how we can identify our true loves. How, when they are cut, you bleed. How sometimes you bleed, and you bleed, and you bleed. Enter your labyrinth at BeWhoYouAre.com.